Ha ha ha! What a defective human. Can't even have kids. If that's the case, I'll remarry with a young, pretty girl who can. Next to David, who was making such heartless remarks, was a younger woman. They looked at each other and giggled. The woman laughing next to David remained silent even after hearing his harsh words towards me and looked at him with a happy expression. I was irritated by her attitude, but with that feeling, I began searching for my bag. Hey, what are you doing? You're so messy. Are you okay? She said it with an annoyed expression as she got closer to David.
Hey Emily, are you listening? It's because of your attitude that we're divorcing. To be honest, I don't care about that right now. It's you doing here. But there's something I want to say to David.
Your divorce, that's fine by me. Here, take this. I finally found what I was looking for in my bag and slammed it on the cafe table. I then forcefully continued speaking to the two of them. They probably weren't expecting such a strong retaliation from me. David was left speechless with his mouth open. Rose, next to him, looked me up and down, evaluating me, but I stared back, not avoiding her gaze. My name is Emily. I'm 32 years old and work as an office worker. Even though I say I work at an office, I'm now running my own business. A few years ago, there was something I desperately wanted to do. So I took a leap of faith and started my own business. Since college, I've always wanted to quit my job and pursue my dreams. To gather funds and skills for that dream, I joined a certain company. I met David at a networking event hosted by that company. The company I joined was a well-known major company. The networking event was held because there had been a merger between companies. I think the purpose of this event was to control the complaints of the employees of the absorbed company by setting up an informal environment to hear them out. The first time I met David was at that networking event. That day, I had gotten drunk, and David kindly took care of me. Trying to sober up in the night breeze, I chatted about various things with David, and through our conversation, I felt that David was a genuinely compassionate and serious person. I was drawn to David's kindness, and we exchanged our contact information. After that, we found time to meet up little by little. Eventually, David and I decided to get married, and we promised each other a happy and long-lasting future. After getting married, David was both passionate about his work and never forgot to care for me. He was a wonderful partner who also thought deeply about our future. David would take the initiative in doing household chores when I was busy. He'd plan fun dates for us if we had days off at the same time. One day, while David and I were relaxing on the living room sofa, we discussed our future. Hey Emily, if we were to have kids, how many would you want? I think one boy and a girl would be nice. I knew it. A boy and a girl, one of each would be perfect. It'd be just right if we had both. He really wanted kids and happily imagined our future family. I also wanted to build a lively family, so I was happy to see David eagerly anticipating having children. However, despite our wishes, 3 years passed and we still didn't have any children. Anything for sexual clearance. One day, as I came out of the bathroom, David was looking at me with hopeful eyes. But all I could do was silently shake my head, indicating that it was another disappointment. Seeing my attitude, David looked quite disappointed and dropped his shoulders. Consumed by guilt, all I could do was bite my lip. That day, David and I had a long talk. David gently encouraged me, who was heartbroken, and seriously considered fertility treatments with me. Around that time, I had quit my job and was supporting our household as a full-time homemaker. Fertility treatments are expensive. Regretting that I should have continued working instead of resigning. I unintentionally voiced my thoughts out loud. David, with a kind smile, reassured me, "Don't worry about that, just leave it to me." Due to my desire for a child, I decided to opt for fertility treatment despite the cost. Since the decision, David has become even more supportive. He listens to my complaints about how stress is the root cause of our issues, actively searches for the best clinics for a treatment, and provides unwavering support. And finally, the day of our first hospital visit arrived. Despite his busy schedule that day, David took paid leave so that he could accompany me, ensuring I didn't feel anxious alone. Various tests were conducted at the hospital, but the root cause of our infertility remained unclear. David patiently continued to encourage me despite the discouraging findings. But no matter how hard we tried, the reality that we couldn't have children remained. Due to the prolonged strain, I began to feel David's attitude towards me becoming colder. Even though he had previously been very supportive and accompanied me to the hospital frequently, it seemed he had started avoiding me as the number of his hospital visits reduced. However, at times he was just as kind as before, making me think that the daily hustle of not seeing results was taking a toll on both his mind and body. I was also preoccupied with the infertility treatments and our busy life. But one day, I realized something. Come to think of it, I hadn't seen David's face recently. This was due to David's increasingly frequent business trips, meaning he was rarely at home. I understood that David was working hard, even for my sake. So it was inevitable that we wouldn't see each other often. X's or grams. In fact, I couldn't even recall the last time we had seen each other face to face. Our time together had become so rare. A few days after these reflections, David returned from a business trip. Hearing the sound of the front door opening, I went to greet David. However, David was taking off his shoes with a stern expression on his face. "David, welcome home. Dinner's ready. The bath's also ready. Do you want to go in first?" "Gosh, I'm home." Launching at me briefly, David uttered a single phrase before heading straight to his room to change. I thought that he must be tired from his trip and started preparing the meal. As time passed, I heard David coming out of the bath. He entered the living room slowly, silently took a beer from the fridge, and was about to drink it. Hey, today was the day for the hospital visit. The doctor said that getting pregnant seemed still tough. As I said that, David stopped his motion. Suddenly he turned towards me, glared fiercely, and shouted, "Hey, give me a break. We've been undergoing treatment for years. but there's no sign of a baby. Is there even any point in this treatment? Are you doing this on purpose so you won't get pregnant? I was stunned by David's never-before-seen attitude and expression and couldn't respond. As I was still trying to process his outburst, David continued with even harsher words. Even though the treatment has shown no progress or results, you keep visiting the hospital. Hospital, really? You're just throwing away money? After bitterly throwing these words at me, David forcefully closed the fridge and left the living room. He then slammed his bedroom door. Hearing that loud noise, I shrank back, my shoulders shaking in shock and fear. From that day onwards, David stopped coming home. Even with such an incident, my daily life remained hectic, and it felt like I was living alone. Even though I tried calling David, he never returned my calls. Days went by without any news from him. However, during times when I was out, it seemed David would secretly come back home and slowly remove his belongings. I only realized this when I decided to clean David's room after a long while. What struck me as odd was that there were fewer items in the room than I remembered. David loved manga, and he had a huge collection of comic books and related items. But when I entered David's room after a long time, the bookshelf had no comic books, and the suitcase and clothes he often wore were also missing. I would never dispose of them, so seeing David's room almost empty was beyond my comprehension. If I hadn't disposed of them, then the only possibility was that David had taken them himself. Realizing that David had no intentions of coming home left me speechless. The night David threw hurtful words at me, I was so shocked and surprised that I couldn't say anything back. This dawn came without us having a chance to communicate our feelings. But when I woke up the next morning, David had already left the house and hadn't returned. Until I saw the empty room, I thought David's outburst was just a result of heightened emotions, and he was finding it hard to return. But seeing the current state made me realize it wasn't something so simple. That unable to gather my thoughts, I stood there dazed for a while. Snapping back to reality, I quickly left David's room and hurried to get ready to go outside for chores, trying not to think any further. Or even after that, I continued to visit the fertility clinic. Although the chances seemed slim, there was a tiny hope that if I got pregnant, David might return. Then, one day while waiting at the hospital, I heard a familiar voice. When I looked in the direction of the voice, even though his appearance had changed, I recognized the silhouette. David? Hey, it's you, David, right? But thinking, I grabbed the person's shoulder and looked at his face. It was indeed David. Wow, Emily, really? Why? The expression on David's face, upon seeing me, clearly showed annoyance and inconvenience. His tone was so rough that I could hardly believe it was the David I knew. Then, a woman I didn't recognize peeked out from behind David. Hey, what's going on? I felt a surge of anger at her silly and nonsensical way of speaking. To the woman, standing out with her overly flashy makeup and clothes and emitting a strong scent of perfume, looked up at me from below. David, who is she? What's your relationship? I interrogated David, frustration evident in my tone. In response, David casually chuckled. Huh, she's my lovely wife? Infuriated by his answer, I spotted a cafe in the vicinity. Without saying another word, I firmly grabbed David's arm, practically dragging him into the cafe. I took a seat facing David and the woman. Both of them were grinning without a hint of remorse. Their carefree smiles only fueled my anger. So David, you said wives earlier. He cared to explain. What's there to explain? It's the truth. David's lack of guilt made me clench my fists tightly in a mix of anger and frustration. Following that, we introduced ourselves, and I learned the name of the woman David referred to as his wife for the first time. She said her name was Rose. Rose ordered an ice cream float, looking pleased when David called her cutes for ordering that. Rose, despite being at the center of this controversy, made no attempt to join the conversation and simply smiled at me. And when David referred to Rose as his wife, she blushed and snuggled up to him. Acting all flirtatious, each of her actions was becoming another reason for my mounting irritation. Glancing at the cafe's clock, I realized it was the time I should have been checked in at the hospital. However, under these circumstances, visiting the hospital was the least of my concerns. Above all, I needed to know the nature of David and Rose's relationship. It's an ordeal. David, I think you're forgetting that currently you're married to me, not her. Exactly. I want to marry Rose as soon as possible, but I can't because you're in the way. I want to marry Rose as soon as possible, but I can't because you're in the way. Yes, David just blatantly treated me as an inconvenience. I tried to calm myself since I was in a public space, but I just couldn't hold back. Hey, you've become so vulgar, David. I can't imagine this from you. I used to know. As I raised my voice, Rose retaliated for the first time. What? That's not true at all. Doesn't David look so manly and cool? I glared at Rose, who continued to speak in her drawn-out, airy tone. Seeing this, David snapped back at me as if I was the one in the wrong. Emily, you say that, but you used to be a quiet girl, didn't you? David laughed cruelly, and Rose deliberately put on a cute smile. Unable to face the two of them and their outrageous behavior, I couldn't help but close my eyes. But David didn't seem to care about me at all, and then he uttered words that insulted me deeply. Ha ha ha, what a defective human, can't even have kids. If that's the case, I'll remarry a young, pretty girl who can. David mocked me with heartless words, and he and Rose looked at each other giggling. And while Rose watched David hurl these cruel words at me, she said nothing. Instead, she looked at David with a happy expression. I was irritated by Rose's attitude and couldn't suppress my emotions. So I began searching through my purse. Hey, what's that? Bisoy. Are you okay? Saying this, Rose looked at me with disgust and moved closer to David. David drew Rose close to him, giving a cold glance my way. Hey, Emily, are you listening? Peter, I'm divorcing you because of your attitude. At that moment, I didn't care about what he said. What mattered more was showing David something concrete. "You're fine by me. Here, take this divorce application." I finally found what I was looking for in my bag and slammed it on the cafe table. But hesitation, I continued speaking abruptly. David probably hadn't expected me to fight back so forcefully. He sat there, mouth wide open, in complete shock. Rose, sitting next to him, looked me up and down as if she were evaluating me. But I met her gaze head-on without flinching. David probably couldn't have imagined where the divorce papers suddenly came from. However, I had always carried them around, ready to be used at any time. It started when David stopped coming home, and when cleaning his room. Looking at David's empty room, I realized he would never return. So I got the divorce forms and kept them in my bag ever since. After obtaining the forms, I filled in all my details and carried them in my bag like a charm. When I told this to a stunned David, Rose chuckled. "That's so creepy. What's wrong with you?" "Shut up. What are you even saying, you thief?" Such a dishonest man. Once this became clear, my heart oddly felt lighter and I started preparing for my new project. Right at that moment, a loud ringtone from my smartphone echoed throughout the room. I wondered what it could be, but I was in the middle of something and couldn't answer the call. After several more rings, I tried to answer, but it seemed the caller had given up, and the ringing abruptly stopped. "Oh, well," I thought, "I'll call back later." But just as I had that thought, the phone rang again. This time I immediately stopped what I was doing and looked at the phone screen. However, the name displayed was David's. I was instantly filled with a sense of repulsion and ignored it, but the phone rang again immediately. I was irritated by these relentless calls. I sighed heavily. The moment the ringing stopped, I immediately pulled out my smartphone and blocked David's number, thus completely cutting off all forms of contact with him. And to be honest, for the past month, I had completely forgotten about David's existence. After the divorce was completed, I had sorted out the house and believed I'd thrown away everything related to David. After all, David had dumped me for a younger woman, so I thought there would be no issue doing something like this. While I was deeply occupied in my work in a quiet environment, the landline at my office rang. I was free at the moment, so I picked it up. It's the receptionist, sounding rather troubled, informed me that the call was from David. I was thinking that ignoring him would inconvenience the receptionist. I sighed and reluctantly picked up the phone. As I waited for the connection, I felt irritated, tapping lightly on my desk, trying to calm myself. Honestly, I was considering hanging up right then and there when David's pitiful voice came through. "Emily, what's going on with you? When did you start making so much money? Why didn't you tell me before?" David's voice lacked the strength and confidence it once had. Seeing this unexpected side of David, I frowned. Right from the moment David brought up money, I realized that the David I knew from our early days no longer existed. That with that realization, my affection for him faded, and I felt determined to get back at him for all the pain he had caused me. David, sadly, when I was starting my company, you weren't by my side. So, the answer to when I started making so much money is a long time ago. It all happened like this. I started my business while you were away. Hearing my words, David began to choke back sobs. Even over the phone, I could hear him sniffling. I was fed up and wanted to end the call with David as soon as possible. So I urged him to get to the point, the main issue. Right, Emily? It's cruel. We loved each other so much. It's just cruel. After all that happened, David's voice was so choked up with tears that it sounded raspy, even over the phone. After submitting the divorce forms, I visited a private investigator and had them look into Rose. Knowing her name made it easy to start the investigation immediately. The results showed that Rose was a new employee working under David and was 23 years old. Shockingly, even knowing David was married, she still engaged in a relationship with him. Moreover, I was able to determine Rose's address and her parents' address. I then hired a lawyer who sent certified mail to both Rose's parents and David's in-laws, notifying them of our intent to sue them for causing emotional damages. The lawyer I hired mediated a meeting between both families in front of Rose's parents and his in-laws. David made lame excuses and ultimately claimed he was merely having fun with Rose. To this enraged Rose, and both her parents and David's in-laws were furious. At the C&D end, David and Rose broke up, and they both struggled to deal with the compensation for the damages. But to find a way to avoid the compensation, David tried to reconnect with me. But by this point, it was clear that would be impossible. That's when he contacted me, the way he complained while crying was almost laughable and pitiful. I've been disowned by both my dad and mom. I have nowhere to go. You're earning a lot and have money, right? It seems like I don't have to work that hard. Would you reconsider having kids with me? I was shocked and disgusted by his audacity to still rely on me and say such things. David, I'm sorry, but I'm perfectly happy with my current life. Please never contact me again. If you persist, I'll sue you. Why? What did I do? David's voice was so loud over the phone, it hurt my ears. Instinctively, I held the phone away from my ear and listened. As he continued to yell, I decided to lay everything out for him. I started the company hoping the profits would help with our fertility treatments. Now, I make $260,000 annually. I did want a child. Anything to me, then when did you start making so much money? I've told you it was while you weren't coming home. If you don't come home, how can we even discuss anything? It's harsh. I could imagine how devastated David was by my straightforward words. But I didn't feel a shred of pity. And to David, who was continuously making excuses and complaining, I delivered the final blow. David, from now on, if you wish to contact me, do so for my lawyer. If not, I will sue you. With that, I hung up the phone. I instructed the receptionist not to accept any calls from David and returned to my work. From then on, life returned to normal. I blocked David's contacts on my smartphone and gave instructions not to attend to his calls at the office. He tried contacting the office once, but the receptionist turned him away and just reported it to me. After receiving the report, I immediately informed my lawyer to sue him and took legal action against David. After that, I received no more contact from David. The only ongoing matter is the payment of damages from David and Rose. I didn't care to know this, but according to the lawyer, Rose and David have been fired from their company and are now juggling multiple jobs to pay the compensation. It's not that I lack sympathy, but this is a consequence of their own actions. They must fully make amends to me until the very end. Honestly, I'm no longer interested in their current situation. I hear from the lawyer. Protectory. Now I live my days to the fullest, tuning out most of the unnecessary noise. There was a knock on the door of the CEO's office, and I was called by my secretary. I have to give a presentation on an important project soon. I had to be constantly distracted by matters concerning Rose and David. Sure, being without a partner feels a bit lonely, but thinking about it now, perhaps not having children was fate, and it might have opened new possibilities for me. I left my office with a motivation, and as I walked alongside my secretary, I smiled at her and she returned a warm smile back. I consider my job as my life partner and plan to enjoy my life fully, prioritizing my company and myself. I can live freely just the way I like,